So picture this. It's 1850.
Okay.
And a wealthy, young Frank writer named Gustave Flaubert decides to travel to Egypt.
Right, the classic European literary tour.
Exactly. And while he's there, he meets an Egyptian courtesan named Kuchik Hanum.
Okay.
And he ends up writing just extensively about her in his diaries, his travel notes. I mean, he describes her as sensual, mysterious, and entirely devoid of any deep thought.
Wow, just a purely exotic plaything.
Literally. He painted this incredibly vivid, totally stereotyped picture of her.
And, I mean, the real historical tragedy of that encounter is that she never had the opportunity to speak for herself.
Right.
Flaubert held the pen, he had the wealth, the platform, the global reach, so his portrayal of her didn't just stay quietly in some personal diary.
It got published and read everywhere.
Exactly. It basically became the widely accepted European blueprint for what the quote-unquote Oriental woman was supposed to be.
Because, the power to tell a story really is the power to conquer.
Absolutely.
And that is the exact engine driving our deep dive today. Welcome, everyone. Today, our mission is to unpack the life and the groundbreaking theories of Edward Said.
Yeah, truly one of the most transformative cultural critics of the 20th century.
Without a doubt. And our goal today is to break down his incredibly complex ideas into clear, digestible concepts.
Especially for you undergraduate students out there.
Right. If you are, say, an undergrad student in India trying to make sense of literature, history, or global politics, Said's theories will completely change how you read the world.
Oh, absolutely. And just to give you an overview, our stack of sources today includes excerpts from the analytical text called Edward Said by Bill Ashcroft and Pal Alawalia, plus various interviews with Said himself and some really key segments from his monumental 1978 book, Orientalism.
Right. And before we really jump in, we do need to give a quick disclaimer. Good call. Because Said's lived experience with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is, well, it's the absolute core of his worldview.
You can't separate it from his work.
No, you can't. But we want to be clear that we are exploring these events strictly as biographical facts to understand the origins of his literary theories.
Right, we're not taking political stances or endorsing the viewpoints of the original source material. We're just reporting on what's in the texts impartially.
Exactly. Because for Said, the life and the theory are just inextricably linked, right?
Totally. I mean, a core part of his philosophy is that an author's real-life identity, where they are from, what they've lived through, cannot be separated from their work.
So let's look at that background, because his life is honestly a massive paradox.
It really is.
He was born an Arab-Palestinian Christian in Jerusalem,
Right.
raised in Egypt, and then eventually became this highly celebrated American citizen and an elite professor at Columbia University in New York.
Yeah, and because of all that movement, he described his overriding sensation in life as being out of place.
Which makes sense.
Right. I mean, he was immersed in this very Western English-speaking education while living in the Middle East, which made him feel disconnected from his immediate surroundings.
Like he was in a bubble.
Exactly. And then he moved to the United States, where he felt equally displaced, but this time as an Arab intellectual in America.
So he's basically the man between worlds. But the thing I'm trying to figure out is how someone who genuinely loved Western high culture.
And he really did. I mean, he was a brilliant classical pianist.
Right. And he devoted his life to teaching European literature, like Joseph Conrad. How does a guy like that end up writing a massive critique of global empires? Where does that fracture happen?
Well, the fracture happens when he basically realizes that the very culture he revered was structurally supported by the project of empire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the literature and the classical music, they weren't just innocent byproducts of Europe. They actually formed the intellectual foundation that allowed imperialism to make sense to the people executing it.
So it's kind of like, okay, imagine being the biggest fan of this legendary rock band. You've memorized their lyrics. You have their posters on your wall.
Right, right.
Only to discover that this band actively funded the destruction of your childhood hometown.
That is a harsh realization.
Right. I mean, how do you reconcile loving their art while fighting their politics? That has to be paralyzing.
It would be for most people. But the thing is, Said didn't let it paralyze him. And he didn't, burn the albums.
He kept playing the music.
He did. He took the elite Western education he received at places like Princeton and Harvard, and he used those exact tools to, quote-unquote, write back to the empire from the inside.
Oh, I love that. He used their own language against them.
Exactly. He engaged with the dominant culture to expose its blind spots.
Which brings us to his blockbuster idea. I mean, if a novelist's travel diary like Flaubert's can help justify a military occupation, We have to completely change how we read.
We do, and that leads right into Orientalism, published in 1978.
Now, usually when people hear the word Orientalism, it sounds like this innocent academic field. Scholars digging up ruins, reading old texts, translating languages.
Yeah, Sad shattered that innocence entirely. He redefined Orientalism as a Western style of dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient.
So it's not just studying it.
No, it is the ultimate application of the formula knowledge equals power. His fundamental argument is that the West didn't just passively discover the East.
They built it.
Yes. By claiming to possess, quote, expert knowledge about the Orient, the West actively constructed it, categorized it, and thereby exerted power over it.
Okay, so wait. I get the theory, but how does that pipeline actually work in the real world? How do we get from Flaubert writing a diary about an Egyptian courtesan to actual geopolitical dominance?
It's a fascinating process. It starts with explorers and novelists bringing back these exotic, infantilizing tales, like Flaubert framing Küçük Hanım as a typical Oriental.
Right, based entirely on his own assumptions.
Exactly. And because she couldn't speak for herself, his version of her became the accepted truth. Then, step 2. Academic institutions back in London or Paris legitimize these tales as historical fact. They create entire university departments dedicated to studying these supposedly backward people.
Oh, so they academicize the stereotype.
Precisely. And then finally, step 3, politicians use these academic quote-unquote facts to argue that the local populations are completely incapable of self-governance.
Which then justifies sending in the military to manage them.
You nailed it. And you see this perfectly in the sources with a quote from Lord Salisbury. He was a British politician in 1881.
What did he say?
Well, Britain and France were both eyeing the Middle East, and Salisbury essentially suggested that instead of fighting each other over the territory, they should just share it.
Wow. Just carve it up like a Thanksgiving turkey.
Literally. And they could only propose such a brazen division because the Orientalist discourse had already done the heavy lifting.
The intellectual groundwork was already laid.
Exactly. It painted the East as exotic, irrational, and backward, precisely so the West could define itself as rational, humane, and superior.
Because if you cast yourself as the rational adult, naturally, you have an obligation to take charge of the irrational child.
That was exactly the justification.
For an undergraduate student in India listening to this, if you're studying the history of British rule, this pipeline explains the entire mechanism of colonization in the subcontinent.
Oh, 100%. The parallels are exact.
The British came in and claimed they, quote, knew India better than Indians did.
Right.
They sent administrators to survey the land, they took fluid social structures and categorized them into rigid castes, and they translated specific texts to create a simplified, controllable picture of this massive, complex civilization.
And that's the key. The cultural conquest precedes the military one. Knowledge gathering wasn't an innocent academic exercise.
It was a weapon.
Yes, it was an administrative weapon. They couldn't tax, police, or control a society they didn't first define and categorize.
It sounds like the West wrote a movie script, cast the East in the supporting role of the backward exotic sidekick, and then basically forced them to live out that role in real life.
That is exactly how stereotypes become tools of actual political and military control.
Man, that is heavy. And because Orientalism was used as a tool for control like that, Said realized that literature is never politically innocent.
Never. A poem or a novel is not a delicate flower existing outside of history.
Which leads us to his next big concept, right? Worldliness.
Yes, worldliness. Said argued that texts do not live in an ivory tower or some magical vacuum. Every single text is worldly.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning it is inextricably tied to the real world of dirt, power, historical events, and human suffering. You cannot simply analyze the beautiful metaphors or admire the grammar of a sentence and call it a day.
Okay, but I want to push back on that a little on behalf of the listener.
Sure.
Because reading everything politically sounds incredibly exhausting for a student. Like if I pick up a beautiful piece of poetry, can it just be a beautiful piece of poetry? Does worldliness mean every single piece of art is just a political weapon?
I totally get that reaction. But Said would argue that ignoring the worldly context of a text actually insults the art.
How so?
Because he loved literature deeply. He didn't want to reduce novels to cheap political pamphlets. But treating art like a fragile decoration robs it of its depth and seriousness. A text is a living document of human experience.
Okay, let's anchor this with a concrete example. Give me some worldliness in action.
Let's take Jane Austen.
Oh, classic.
Right. Her novels are masterpieces of English literature, famous for their romance, manners, and depictions of these beautiful English country estates.
Yeah, tea times and grand balls.
Exactly. For decades, literary critics only talked about the polite society within those pages, but Said comes along and asks a very worldly question.
Which is?
Where does the wealth to maintain these grand estates actually come from?
Oh, wow. And the answer is, it's quietly tucked into the background of the novels, isn't it?
Yes, it's colonial plantations in the Caribbean.
Right, the sugar trade.
The refined, wealthy lifestyles of Austen's characters are directly subsidized by brutal colonial exploitation abroad. Now, Austen doesn't center the novel around this, but the silence around the reality of that wealth is itself a political reality.
That makes so much sense. To acknowledge a text's worldliness is to respect that the author was writing in a real place, dealing with real societal pressures.
Exactly. Reading Jane Austen and ignoring the colonial plantations isn't protecting the beauty of the novel.
It's choosing to be blind to half of its reality.
Right. It's pretending the bricks of the Grand Mansion magically appeared out of thin air.
Which forces us to ask, if every text is dripping with worldly power, what is the job of the reader? What is the role of an intellectual in society if the authors themselves are tangled up in imperial politics?
And Sai's answer to that is, we must practice secular criticism.
Secular criticism.
Yes. And his definition of who qualifies as an intellectual completely flips the academic script. He believed a true intellectual must operate as an amateur.
Okay, wait. Amateur. Because usually that means like an unskilled hobbyist who doesn't know what they're talking about.
Right, but he didn't mean it that way. He meant amateur in the purest original sense of the word. Someone who pursues knowledge for the love of truth.
Oh, okay.
Unburdened by the need to please a university board, secure tenure, or get a corporate grant.
Because the modern university system really encourages hyper-specialization, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. You have economists only talking to economists using complex math, and literature professors only talking to each other using dense, confusing jargon.
And an amateur is dangerous to that system because they can't be bought.
Exactly. They aren't worried about their career progression within a specific institution, so they speak clearly to the general public.
And they practice secular criticism.
Yeah.
Now, normally we think of secular as simply meaning, not religious.
Right, but in Said's framework, secular means being totally free from blind loyalty to any ideology.
No isms. Like you aren't a dogmatic Marxist or a dogmatic liberal or a dogmatic feminist or even a dogmatic post-colonialist.
Exactly. The moment you declare solidarity before criticism, the moment you decide to back your political team no matter what they do, you cease to be an intellectual.
Wow.
Said believed the primary function of the intellectual is to speak truth to power. You cannot do that if you are wearing the uniform of a political faction.
So it's kind of like an intellectual shouldn't be a cheerleader wearing a team jersey.
Right.
They should be the fearless referee who isn't afraid to call a foul on anyone, even the home crowd.
That is a perfect analogy. And Said lived this out painfully in his own life.
Yeah.
He was an incredibly prominent advocate for the Palestinian cause, giving a voice to a deeply marginalized people. But when he felt the Palestinian leadership was making disastrous decisions, he was fiercely critical of them.
Wait, really? He criticized his own side publicly?
He did. The sources note he actually resigned from the Palestine National Council.
Oh, wow.
He prioritized his critical independence over political popularity. He was willing to be unpopular with his own people if it meant telling the truth as he saw it.
That takes serious courage. But to maintain that level of fierce independence, to avoid getting sucked into the comfort of a team, Said argues we have to embrace something else, right?
Yes, the condition of exile.
Now, for Said, literal exile was a profound physical and emotional tragedy. He lost his homeland.
He did, but he transformed that tragedy into a powerful intellectual metaphor. Being an outsider, never feeling entirely settled or comfortable, gives you a cognitive advantage.
How so?
Because you see the world with more than one pair of eyes.
Oh. You aren't lulled to sleep by the dominant culture's narrative.
Exactly. And this brings us to his concept of contrapuntal reading.
Contrapuntal, that's a music term, right?
It is. In classical music, counterpoint occurs when two independent melodies are played simultaneously, creating a complex, layered harmony. Said in exile reads a text contrapuntally.
Okay, so let's map this right back to our Jane Austen example from earlier.
Yeah.
You read the novel and you hear the main dominant melody, the grand romance, the beautiful English estates, the societal manners.
Yes, but because you are reading contrapuntally, your ears are attuned to the margins.
You're listening for what's missing.
Right. you simultaneously hear the second, hidden melody, the invisible labor, the imported sugar, the colonized people making the English estate possible.
So you hear both the empire and the colony at the exact same time.
Precisely. And there's an incredible historical example of this in the sources. A man named Erich Auerbach.
Who was he?
He was a brilliant Jewish scholar who was forced to flee Nazi Germany. He ended up exiled in Istanbul, Turkey.
Okay.
He was completely cut off from the massive libraries of Europe, cut off from his academic peers, and living in immense anguish. Yet, from that position of exile, he wrote a book called Mimesis.
That's a big deal.
It remains one of the most magisterial, comprehensive studies of Western literature ever produced.
From Istanbul, cut off from everything.
Yes. And Said's argument is that Auerbach didn't write a masterpiece in spite of his exile, but because of it.
Oh, I see. The exile gave him the critical distance to see Western literature as a whole, from the outside looking in.
Exactly. The displacement forced a clarity he might never have achieved from a comfortable, familiar office in Berlin.
Which brings up a very practical question for, say, an undergraduate student listening today.
Sure.
Let's say a student has lived in the exact same hometown their entire life. They haven't been geographically displaced. How do they adopt an exilic mindset without, packing their bags and leaving home?
That's a great question. Metaphorical exile is an act of will. It's a conscious choice to step outside your intellectual comfort zone.
Okay.
You have to actively question the chatty, familiar world of accepted truths around you. When the evening news or professor or politician tells you that a certain group of people is backward or a certain foreign policy is just natural, you refuse to just swallow it.
You choose to be the outsider looking at the code.
Exactly. You choose not to belong to the comfortable consensus.
Man, we have covered massive ground today. Edward Said fundamentally changed the way we interact with information. He showed us that reading is not a passive hobby.
No, it's an active worldly responsibility.
Right. Through Orientalism, we understand the mechanical pipeline of how knowledge is weaponized to justify military and political dominance.
And through worldliness, we realize that ignoring the historical dirt and power dynamics behind a text is actually a disservice to the art itself.
Absolutely. And by practicing secular criticism and adopting the contrapuntal mindset of an exile, anyone can train themselves to hear that second hidden melody.
Because the power to tell a story is the power to conquer. But the power to read contrapuntally is the power to resist.
So true. But before we wrap up entirely, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought about the present.
Yeah, let's bring it to today.
Because historically, as we discussed, the West created the Orient through travel diaries, paintings, and academic papers. But look at our digital landscape today.
The tools of knowledge creation have shifted entirely.
Right. If you're scrolling on your phone, you have to ask, how are modern digital algorithms, targeted social media feeds, and AI-generated content quietly orientalizing entirely new groups of people without us even realizing it?
It is a new form of knowledge gathering for a new form of power.
Who is currently writing the script for the algorithm and who is being cast in the supporting role without ever being asked for their side of the story?
That is the ultimate contrapuntal question.
The next time you encounter a definitive narrative about a foreign culture, remember to look for the invisible ink. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.